Okay, welcome back. We are pre-recording, so I will speak to you as though it is Thursday, July 22nd? 22nd, but for me, it's a week ago. So I think I am at camp right now with my family and with Pedro Carvalho and with some friends. We are having a good time, I hope. And I hope that you have read some of Michelle's blog from last week, and maybe you will send me some feedback about what you have read. Okay, since this is a pre-recording, I cannot interact with you directly. However, one moment, will you be on for them to email you or anything like that, or you're not going to do it next week?
No, we're going to post this video on the website.
Okay, so there's nobody here for you to write an email to at this moment. But if you send us emails, we'll get them and we'll talk about them next week. Okay? So, we're going to review what we spoke of last week. As you can see, my picture of the elephant is still up. And my picture of the art from the Smithsonian Art Gallery. When I was a child, I went to the art gallery and I saw a whole bunch of modern art in the 1960s. And I had no respect for it. As an 8-year-old child, 9-year-old child, I looked at art like that and I said, why is it here? These artists have no talent. Anybody could do better than that. And my father rebuked me and he said, you don't know anything. This is great art. It means something different to everyone. And I said, the artists of the past who painted the Mona Lisa or some picture which you can see what it is, that took skill. But this, anyone can do it. And my father said, no, the artists of today could paint the Mona Lisa if they wanted to, but they have gone beyond that to some kind of art which is more imaginative, more creative, more expressive of what is in their mind. And I did not agree as a small child. And to this day, I do not agree. I do not think that a piece of art that everybody gets a different meaning out of is good. I think a piece of art should be a meeting place of minds where we can come together for profitable discussion and also to receive ideas and input from the mind of the artist into the mind of the viewer. I'll remind you of the story of the blind philosophers who were trying to discern the nature of an elephant. And one philosopher found the tail and said an elephant is it wasn't a snake, it was very like a rope. And another philosopher found the trunk and he said an elephant is very like a snake. And another felt the legs and said an elephant is very like a tree. the trunk of a tree. And another felt the side and said, an elephant is like a wall. And here we have two philosophers who found the ear. And one said it is like a sail of a ship. And the other said, yes, but it is also warm and hairy, like a blanket. And the other said, yes, you're right. It is like a blanket, but it is upright, and it flaps in the wind like a sail. And the other said, you're right. It is like a sail that's made of a blanket. And they agreed. They had profitable discussion. They had intelligent discussion because they were feeling the same thing. They had the same sensory input, and they brought to it their own experience and clarified for one another what they were experiencing. The fact that the ear of the elephant had independent existence that could be perceived independently by two different philosophers made the ground for discussion, for fruitful discussion. So in the same way, a poem which has independent existence, and any two people looking at it will see substantially the same thing. This poem provides a vehicle for profitable discussion between two critics. Not because the critics are seeing totally different aspects, but because the critics are seeing substantially the same thing, with only slight differences that they bring from the wealth of their own experience. So the whole idea is that a poem has independent existence. It's not just in our mind. Okay, now we are on page 36. And I am going to back up and read a little bit more so that you can hear the fluency of the reading and the flow of the argument, and also so that anyone who wants to clip the audio portion and put it together can do so. So I will begin on page 35 with the paragraph beginning with the words, analysis is a process of recreation. And then I will go all the way through page 36 to the end of the paragraph in the middle. That's the paragraph we're on right now. We broke in the middle of that one last week. Okay. So, page 35, beginning in the middle of the page, analysis is a process of recreation. Okay? Analysis is a process of recreation in response to the black marks on the pages. It is a more pondered following through of the process of recreation in response to the poet's words that any genuine and discussable reading of the poem must be. Such a recreation entails a diversity of kinds of judgment. And when I emphasize the diversity, I am thinking of the different kinds of value that we cover with one word. A judgment is personal and spontaneous, or it is nothing. But to say that it is spontaneous is not to say that it may not have been prompted by a suggestion from another, and to say that it is personal is not to say that it means to be merely that. The form of a judgment is, this is so, isn't it? The question asking for confirmation that the thing is so, but prepared for an answer in the form, yes, but. The but standing for corrections, refinements, precisions, amplifications. The judgments may, by Andreski's criteria, be value judgments, but they are in intention universal. Though the validity of a total inclusive judgment of a poem cannot be demonstrated, it is always possible in criticism to get beyond the mere assertion. The critical procedure is tactical. The critic, with his finger moving from this to that point in the text, aims at so ordering his particular judgments, this is so, isn't it, that, yes, having in the succession of them almost inevitably come for answer, the rightness of the inclusive main judgment stands clear for the prompted recognition. It makes itself, needing no assertion. The element of prompting, of course, is present in the very nature of the critical undertaking, which embodies a positive impulse and has a creative purpose. This is what exhortation, the word about which Andreski is equivocally apologetic, registers in that passage I quoted from his first chapter, page 27 above. Analysis, then, insofar as it aims at establishing a favorable judgment, is the process of justifying the assumption that a poem which we take to be a real poem stands between us in what is in some sense a public world. Minds can meet in it, and there is so essential a measure of concurrence as to its nature and constitution that there can be intelligent, that is, profitable, differing about precisely what it is. It is neither merely private nor public, in the sense that it can be brought into a laboratory, quantified, tripped over, or even pointed to. The only way of pointing to particulars in it is to put one's finger on given spots in the assemblage of black marks on the page. And that assemblage is not the poem. The poem is a product, and in any experienced actual existence, a phenomenon of human creativity, the essentially collaborative nature of which it exemplifies in diverse, distinguishable modes. And yet it is real. To use a formulation I threw out years ago in the course of defining the nature of the discipline I am concerned to vindicate, it belongs to the third realm, the realm of that which is neither public in the ordinary sense nor merely private. Okay, I would like to back up and just lightly touch upon some main ideas from the text that were part of last week's reading. And then we'll move straight into the new material. So, let's see. Okay. I'm looking for something I wanted to mention when I read it, and now I can't find it. All right. Can't remember what I wanted to point out. But, all right. I think what we'll do is move in to the paragraph beginning with analysis then, insofar as it aims at establishing a favorable judgment. That's on page 36. That is the paragraph we ended with last week. We ended in the middle. So let's begin the paragraph again. Analysis, then, insofar as it aims at establishing a favorable judgment, so that meant analysis, insofar as it tries to establish agreement between critics, is the process of justifying the assumption that a poem, which we take to be a real poem, stands between us in what is, in some sense, a public world. Okay, this idea of a public world. This is a phrase that Levis is using to refer to the portion of the world which is material, which is verifiable, which is objective. Okay, that is the public world. He is referring to the private as the subjective, that which is only mine. I keep it to my private self. It's personal. It isn't out there for public consumption. Okay, so he's saying the very fact that we are able to analyze a poem implies that there is something real that can be ripped apart, understood, and recreated. Something objective. It is in the public world. Okay? So, analysis. Insofar as it aims at establishing a concurrence of opinion, an agreement, is the process of justifying, proving, the assumption that a poem which we take to be real is, in fact, real. It stands between us in what is, in some sense, a public world. In some sense means not in all senses a public world. So, this pencil exists in a public world in a way that a poem might not quite. There's some sense in which it is not like a material article. Okay? But how is it like it's a public world? Minds can meet in it, and there is so essential a measure of concurrence as to its nature and constitution that there can be intelligent, that is profitable, differing about what precisely it is. Now, one good exercise when you are trying to make sure you understand a sentence is to make sure you know what the reference for all the pronouns are. So, when it says, minds can meet in it, and there is so essential a measure of concurrence as to its nature and constitution. Its nature and constitution. That there can be intelligent differing about what precisely it is. The it is the poem, and minds can meet in the poem, in some sense, and there is essential concurrence as to what its nature and constitution is. The poem's nature, the poem's constitution. Now, we know what nature is. What is the nature of this poem? What are the characteristics of its poem? Constitution. We have two meanings of the word constitution. Constitution could mean, well, there are many meanings of this word. It could mean the Constitution of the United States, the body of law. No. Constitution. When you constitute something as a verb, you put it together. out of parts. I believe that is the sense. How is this poem constructed? How is it constituted? How is it put together? So that's the meaning of what is its constitution and what precisely the poem is. So there must be a great deal of concurrence about all of these aspects of the poem in order for there to be profitable and intelligent discussion about about different perspectives on it. A little bit of difference, a lot of basic agreement, kind of like that elephant's ear. They basically agreed on 98% of it and argued about fine points of difference. Okay, so a poem is like that. It is objective enough that people can agree on 98% of it and profitably discuss the fine shades of the last 2%. Okay, remember, he said up in the first sentence, a poem which we take to be a real poem stands between us in what is, in some sense, a public world. And then he went on to qualify. In what sense is it in a public world? In what sense isn't it? This next sentence is along with this argument. We just said in what sense it is in a public world. There's essential agreement. But it is neither merely private nor public in the sense that it can be brought into a laboratory, quantified, tripped over, or even pointed to. The only way of pointing to particulars in it is to put one's finger on given spots in the assemblages of black marks on the page, and that assemblage is not the poem. So, the poem stands between us in some sense in a public world. It's public in that minds can meet in it, and that we have such a high degree of agreement about what it is that we can profitably discuss and differ about the fine shades of difference in our perspective. It is not merely private. However, neither is it so public that it can be brought into a laboratory, quantified, tripped over, pointed to. So, remember last week when I set up the spectrum of total, inclusive, judgment versus mere assertion. Okay? Mere assertion was purely personal. No independent verifiability at all. This is just my idea, and who cares? Nobody cares what I think, because there's no relevance to anything in the real world. That's on one end of the spectrum, and all the way over here is laboratory. Trip over it, point to it. It's, materially verifiable, like my red pen from last week. Yeah, it's a pen. Yes, it's red. Yes, it's white. But what fine shade of red is it? See, that would be, on that level of laboratory. Okay? So, it is neither merely private nor public in the sense that it can be brought into a laboratory, quantified, tripped over. It would have to be material to trip over it. Or even pointed to, like you can point to a tree or point to a fire hydrant. Can't point to it. The only way of pointing to particulars in it, it's to put one's finger on given spots in the assemblage of black marks on the page, and that isn't the poem. Now, with the elephant, you could point to the whole elephant, or you could point to the ears and point to the tail and point to the trunk and point to the feet. Everybody has the same picture in their mind of an elephant. With a poem, you can't point to it that way. Even if we all have the same picture, supposing it's a poem we have analyzed, supposing it's a poem we have enjoyed together, suppose all of you in Brazil have the same cultural heritage as I, and we all heard the same stories when we were kids. Could we point to them in the same way you point to a tree or a fire hydrant or an elephant? No. Because this is in the realm of ideas. The only way to point to it is by pointing to that spot on the page, or this spot, or this spot. You can point to the black marks, but you're not really pointing to the poem. Because the poem, see, this is a blueprint. If you took my DNA code that exists in each of my cells, that contains the plans for the creation of my body. So now you have the code. Do you have me? No, you don't have me. Supposing you looked at the computer code of a complicated video game or a program. So you're looking at the code. Maybe you can even read code. Maybe you're a computer genius and you can read code. Just by reading the code, is the code the reality of the computer program? Is it the reality of the video game? No. It embodies a concept. A concept. It's a way of transmitting a concept. If I were to send you a message in Morse code, dot, dash, dash, dot. And that message, it would have a meaning. That's not it. You have to put the meaning in. Okay, so you cannot point to a poem. It doesn't exist in the public world the way a tree or a fire hydrant does. The only way to point to it is by pointing to the black marks on the page. In the assemblage of black marks, remember the word assemblage we had in the past when we talked about someone thinking a community was an assemblage of people that could be put on a list. It's just like this random list. And Levis was talking about a community as sort of a mystical group with history and depth, and not really something that you could put names on. Assemblage. An assemblage of black marks. You can point to them. Assemblage emphasizes the random nature, not the meaningful nature, the systematic, meaningful nature. Okay, so assemblage is just random. The only way to point to particulars in the poem, particular aspects, is to put one's finger on given spots in the assemblage of black marks on the page. And that assemblage of black marks is not the poem. The poem is a product, and in any experienced actual existence, a phenomenon of human creativity, the essentially collaborative nature of which it exemplifies in diverse, distinguishable modes. Another slightly complicated sentence. Okay, let's pull out certain ideas. The poem is a product of human creativity. Okay, so one sentence ago, it said, the poem is not the black marks on the page. That is not the poem. The poem, but what is the poem? Well, he's going to try to say what the poem is. Now, I'm going to start out myself saying what I think the poem is. I think the poem is the light bulb that went off in the poet's head. Inside the poet's head, inside the poet's heart, there was a vision. He saw it in his heart and in his head and in his spiritual eye. And he tried to communicate what he saw by means of figurative language, analogy, metaphor. Perhaps there was a feeling of sadness or of grief or of elation or joy or of something else that went along with images. And he somehow tried to grab the entire experience of something transcendent, something big, and he tried to communicate that to you. And how could he do it? He could write a book of 1,000 pages trying to capture every aspect of this transcendent, universal truth. But instead of doing that, he attempted to evoke this by means of images and rhythm patterns and rhyme patterns and music and analogy, narrative. He attempted to evoke something that would draw on your life experience to give sort of life to these words so that you could experience what he saw and experienced. So the poem for me is the embodiment of a huge idea that he's trying to put forth. So really, the heart and soul, it's like when I said about my DNA, if you have my DNA code, do you have me? Well, at best, with my DNA code, you would have a knowledge of my body, but you would not have my spirit, my soul, my personality, and my uniqueness. Okay? What's me? Am I my body or am I my soul? Well, I would say I am my soul, united and embodied within, incarnated within my body. So I am my body, but I'm more my soul. In the same way, the poem is the vision, but it's incarnated and enfleshed in the words. And there's an intimate connection between the words and the spirit. And the union of the two is the poem. Okay, that's what I say a poem is. Let's see how Levis attacks what a poem is. It certainly is not a bunch of marks on a page. Let's see what he says it is. Okay, first he says, it is a product of human creativity. It is an issue. It is birthed. It is something new which comes out of something old. It's something that is created by human beings who are in the image of God the Creator. One of our key ways that we resemble God Himself is in our creativity. We don't just move one thing to move things from place to place. We actually create new things. So a poem is a product, an issue of human creativity. And in any experienced actual existence, a phenomenon of human creativity. When something is a phenomenon, it means it's an example of. So a poem, an individual poem, is one example of the whole class of poetry. Now, poetry is product of human creativity, and any individual poem is a species of it. It's an individual. It's a phenomenon of human creativity. So in this construction of the sentence, it's shooting product of human creativity and a phenomenon of human creativity. It's the phenomenon in any actual experience of it. So if I read you a poem, that poem is an example. It is a phenomenon. It is a selection, a species of poetry, of human creativity. It is a concrete example of human creativity. Of human creativity, the essentially collaborative nature of which, remember I told you, of which is used when we are inverting the normal order of a sentence, where we put a subject in the end or an object in front or something like that. So, of human creativity, the essentially collaborative nature of which it exemplifies in diverse and distinguishable modes. What is it? The poem. Of which. Okay, so I'm going to reorder this sentence so that the sentence itself is clear, just this phrase of it. Okay. The poem exemplifies the essentially collaborative nature of human creativity in diverse and distinguishable modes. Okay, so I'm going to write this down. The poem, which is it in the sentence, exemplifies, that means it shows forth, exemplifies in various ways, distinguishable, the collaborative, essentially collaborative, nature, the essentially collaborative nature of human creativity. So we needed the of which because human creativity actually came first in the sentence. And then he went on to talk about it, so we needed the of which. Human creativity of which the poem exemplifies in various ways. Okay, so the idea is the poem exemplifies the collaborative nature of human creativity. And in what sense is human creativity collaborative? Well, for one thing, language itself is collaborative. We agree to call this a pen, a brown pen. We agree to call this a pencil. And with human creativity, there is a process of putting something forth and then asking for feedback. And then the feedback comes, and then we give feedback again. So it's this is so, isn't it? And then the person comes back with, yes, but. And then you think, okay, I need to say it a different way. And no human being grows up or exists in a vacuum. All of us enter into this life as part of a tradition. People have gone before us and have sculpted the world into which we are born, and we inherit their ideas and their ways of seeing things, and then we build upon them creatively. So we create within a community. And a poem exemplifies in various distinguishable modes the essentially collaborative nature of human creativity. Essentially means intrinsically, at the very core of its nature, human creativity is collaborative. It is not merely personal, solely personal. It cannot be only personal. When it says the poem exemplifies, it means in its very phenomena, the fact that it exists, it shows forth the collaborative nature of human creativity. Okay? So let's read the full sentence. The poem is a product, and in any experienced actual existence, that's like when you read an individual poem, it is a phenomenon of human creativity, the essentially collaborative nature of which it exemplifies in diverse, distinguishable modes. Distinguishable means we can see them. It's possible to see them. And yet, it is real. The phrase, and yet, suggests that what is being said is contrary in some way to what was said before. So it casts light on what was being said before. When we say, and yet it is real, that suggests that what came before underlines the idea that it was not real, that the poem is not real. So when we say a poem is a product of human creativity, or when we say it is something which is invisible, or when we say it cannot be tripped over or brought into a laboratory or pointed to, except by pointing to various points of the black dots, we're suggesting in some sense that it's not real. We're suggesting that it's different from other public things. So then he goes, and yet it is real. To use a formulation I threw out years ago in the course of defining the nature of the discipline I am concerned to validate, it belongs to the third realm, the realm of that which is neither public in the ordinary sense, nor merely private. Okay, so now he's come to the real point. The entire paragraph above was saying It is real, but not exactly real. It is definitely has independent existence, and yet not the kind of thing you could trip over. It belongs to a third realm. So now he's said, okay, there is a third realm. It's not merely subjective. That was over here on the spectrum. Nor is it public in the ordinary sense. It's something in the middle. There's an interesting phrase in this sentence that I would like to point out. He says, to use a formulation I threw out years ago. Usually, when we say, I threw it out years ago, threw, that's the past tense of throw. Past tense of throw. Usually when we say, I threw something out, it means I put it in the trash. I gave it in the sense of an idea or a phrase. You would say, I threw it out. I don't use it anymore. I got rid of it. Usually to throw something out means to get rid of it. But in this case, when he says to use a phrase, a formulation, I threw out years ago in the course of defining the nature of the discipline, he means I tossed it out as an offhand sort of phrase that I used years ago. I came up with this phrase or this formulation and I tossed it out casually. So it means to use it casually in conversation or in a lecture. So to use a formulation I threw out years ago in the course of defining the nature of the discipline I am concerned to vindicate. It belongs to the third realm. So he threw out the idea of a third realm. Now, the fact that he threw it out means that he didn't put it forth in a serious, scientific, or in a literary critical way as something that he defined rigorously. It just means he tossed out the phrase without a lot of explanation or a lot of defense. Okay, he just, he coined the phrase, he used it. He just said, okay, it's not merely personal, it's not really public in the ordinary sense, so it's part of a third realm. But he didn't really define it. That's what it means when I threw out this formulation. I tossed it out. By the way, tossed out means the exact same as threw out, and you can use it in both senses. Put it in the garbage or use it casually. So this idea of the third realm, a realm of that which is neither public in the ordinary sense nor merely private. So it's something which has characteristics of both, public and private. Okay, I would like to read the next paragraph, but essentially stop here with the explanations because time is getting a little late. And so let me go ahead and read the next, just so that we get a little preview of what we'll be talking about next week. Okay, so we just finished saying it belongs to the third realm. Poems belong to a third realm, a realm of that which is neither public in the ordinary sense, nor merely private. I point in this explanation of what critical analysis actually is to the peculiar importance for thought of the distinctive discipline of literary study. the discipline of that should give university English its title to existence and respect. For an account of how a poem exists is a pregnant hint of the way in which the human world is created and in constant renewal maintained. It is into the human world that, in Marjorie Green's sketch of a human being's attainment of full humanity, the child is born, the world in which it more and more fully lives, and she makes it plain that living is both recreative and creative, explaining, in her refutation of Russell, the nature of standards, she says, and then she goes on to an extended quote. So we're going to stop here. Let me write it down. And the only other thing I wanted to point out is he threw out this phrase in the course of defining the nature of the discipline of literary study. Now, in the past, he taught this to all his students, so he just had to define it to students, and he told them about the third realm. But now, he is in a place where he is concerned to vindicate this discipline, because the discipline is under attack. So he has to vindicate, which means to retrieve the good reputation of this discipline of critical analysis. In the past, he could afford to just throw out ideas because the discipline wasn't under attack. He was just educating students in its use. But now he has to fend off aggressive attacks on the very discipline itself. So he will go in to talking about what it is, I'm sure, in the next paragraphs. So if you have any comments, please email them to us, and we will look at the email and talk about it next week. Also, we are hoping to get a poll onto the website about who is interested in coming for an extended visit, a month, 2 months, to practice English. I'm going to be opening up my home to a limited number of students to come and stay with us, live with the family, and practice their English, study English. So if you are interested and think you might be interested, keep your eye on the website and we'll come up with some questions about it. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next week.